Hey, so this is a different style of teaching today. I don't have any illustrations or things or charts or anything. This is called a read aloud. I don't know if you ever remember those in school. So this is, I'm going to be reading a lot of what I wrote because I found myself taking a lot of side trails, kind of going off this way and that way, and I wasn't really focusing on the point. So I wrote it down so that we could do it. So today we're starting a series called My God Story. And this is my God story on how we defeated cancer. So the point that I'm making today is when you struggle, God won't intervene with your standards of Him. He uses the standard of His character to intervene. So God, when you're in a struggle, God won't intervene with your standard of Him. He uses the standard of His character to intervene. So that's the big point today. Okay? So my cancer story started in 2018. And no, I wasn't around when that song was written that we just sang, which I love. It was written in 1896. To 120 years ago, I wasn't around then.
So I don't believe it.
But in 2018, I was around, and I had a lymph node that enlarged right here on my jawline. And so we prayed, and we sought medical intervention and guidelines. And after a month, we had it removed. And it was, when they took it out, they tested it, and they discovered that it had dead lymphoma, cancer cells. Well, that's cool. Right? I mean, dead cells, that means God answered our prayers, right? That means I don't have to go through this whole cancer thing. I can avoid it, right? And so we just moved on with our life. Because it triggered a bunch of stuff inside of me. I had some of my struggles with God because He had not answered the healing prayers throughout my life. Most of my struggles rotate around my mom and her headaches. My mom left the United States to become a missionary in Colombia, and she left everything behind. Back then you only came back on furlough like every 5 years, so she would always see her parents every 5 years, and it was difficult. But my mom suffered from just severe migraine headaches. I mean, they were just debilitating headaches all the time. It wasn't like she had them sometimes and they came back. They were always there. And people would pray, and sometimes we'd pray, and it would be like gone, and then the next morning it would be back. We had some of the big name healers come through Colombia, and they'd have these campaigns where they would have like thousands of people with verifiable healings. But not my mom. I mean, they'd pray for her, and she was never healed. And then towards the end of her life, as she aged, the headaches became so debilitating that my just fun-loving, my mom just loved life. She was just so much fun. She basically became a hermit. Yet, my mom loved Jesus with all her being. She never once, throughout that whole journey of 60 years or so of fighting headaches, never once doubted how much God loved her. Well, that, to me, is difficult to process. Because we prayed to get healed, and yet she still loved God. How is that possible? Like, how can you do that? You know what I mean? And so, so then it hit a crescendo. My mom died at the age of 70 from cancer. I felt robbed from, and my reaction to God was not very pretty. And I know my feelings don't scare God, but it did affect how I was able to receive His comfort. Then, I want to add one more thing for my teenage years. I knew God was real, but as a teenager, I gave in to temptations frequently, to put it nicely, with my emotional hurt from being severely bullied and feeling more like I was less than others. I faced God and just did not believe that He was a good God. I didn't think He was a good anything, good father, or good nothing. He was just not good. And I just felt like He was distant. And maybe a better word would be that He was capricious. So I had to make things turn out good for my own. So I fell into this deception. Okay, I'm not proud of this, and I don't understand why I fell for it, but I did. I decided I was going to be the first person ever to be a good sinner and a good Christian at the same time. I know, it's ridiculous. I hate to admit that. I believe that. Now, skipping forward 20 years, I got married. I struggled with me being infertile. And I prayed to God, really believing that He would heal me, and He never did. But side note, I got 2 great kids out of this whole deal. I can't be prouder of my 2 kids. And then Luana, adding into the mix, that's just like amazing. Okay, back to the story. In those 20 years, I often struggled with pornography on and off. And this addiction was an impetus for me participating in an event in our church called the Jesus Encounter. At this event, that and a few other prayer counseling sessions that I had, I was free from my addiction, and I've been free from it for over 15 years now. One of the biggest issues I dealt with was the realization that God really is good. That He is a good God, you know? I wasn't even able to say that He was a good Father. I walked away being proud to be called His Son. I had come far from my deception. And this was kind of like the final stake that declared that I was no longer living in my deception. My goal in life was to be known as His Son and to be known only as a good Christian. Hint, the oldest guy in the church. Struggling does not disappear. You will struggle your whole life, okay? But it gets less dramatic as you get older. If you keep your eyes on God, keep your heart soft towards Him, and you keep on obeying Him. Okay? So, back to the story. About 16 years ago, my mom died. That stirred up so many feelings that God did not listen to our prayers for healing. Then, a few months later, Connie's mom died. I mean, they both died of cancer. And it was just a tough period for me, and now I'm 100% Christian, right? It just stirred up all these serious questions that I've had my whole entire life. The kids were teenagers, and they had some rough spots in the teenage years. And Connie and I learned to pray like we had never prayed before. Plus, I learned about the grace of God. Yet deep down inside, this 100% Christian had serious doubts about Him, about God and His character. Then at the age of 49, I was confronted by my heart when I was discovered that I had cancer in my body. I no longer could sweep away my doubts under the rug and act like they don't exist, right? I was forced to confront them straight on. At the start of 2019, I had a hernia. It was so painful that I actually finally went to the doctor, right? I was one of those guys that just never went to the doctor. They prepared, in the preparation, they took what is now being my first CT scan. I've had hundreds since then, it feels like. And at the top corner of the scan, they saw an enlarged spleen. Now, I had no symptoms that there was an aggressive cancer growing in my body. None. I had 0 symptoms. So God calls my hernia a God book, because the hernia disappeared after that. But now I was able to know that there was something going on. And so then we entered this horrible moment. You have this time where it's like, you don't know this cancer, but you're trying to believe that it's not, and you're trying, where do my faith goes in, what do I believe, and it just becomes this time of fear and despair. And it ran rampant in my family until I had my PET scan. And then Arlie and I were driving through Grandview to gather our favorite things, because it was going to be his last Boy Scout camp as a scout. And it was a snow camp where they actually built igloos. It's one of the cooler of the camps. It's kind of neat, right? And so we're driving around town, and I receive a phone call from the doctor to let me know that definitely what was in my body was cancer, and that it was in several parts of my lymphatic system, and that I should still keep my appointment for the next week with the surgeon to have my spleen removed to determine exactly what kind of cancer it is and what treatment to do. Well, my first reaction was calm, because I had my almost 18-year-old son in the car, right? He was driving us around. But internally, I was angry. I was so mad at God. Like, how dare you? Over the prior 3 weeks, I listened to my children, and Connie's heartbreaking, having to deal with this reality of cancer. We always heard cancer, you always hear cancer is kind of like a death sentence in most cases, right? And actually it is in many ways. And it was just hard listening to the heartbreaking. Both my wife and my kids' hearts just breaking. And our fear and despair, I know, is valid because it was cancer. Well, emotionally, finally, it all came to a boiling point. We were at camp, and I decided to drive up the road a little bit, and I just started screaming and shouting until I went hoarse. I threw snowballs at trees. I mean, I was just letting it all out. And I have to say, I'm not especially proud of the things I said to God. I'm especially not proud of the way I disparage His character. But many of you might be thinking, oh, well, it's healthy to express yourself. And that God is not afraid of your real feelings. Well, all those are true. But at that point, I didn't care for any Christian one-liners. I was just scared to die. I did not want to die. Then I had to go back and hang out with the scouts and parents for the night or so, not knowing how to communicate this visceral fear and despair that I had. When camp was over, we met Connie and Elena in Yakima to switch cars and suitcases, and the kids went back home, and Connie and I went the other way to Seattle. Home at the time was in Grandview, which is between Tri-Cities and Yakima. Connie and I started talking on the way, and we started talking. I don't remember the words that we used, but I can tell you that it was full of fear and despair for both of us. So we, actually most probably Connie, decided that we should worship. For several songs we worshiped, the volume cranked way up, and we were singing at the top of our voices. And at that point, the song, it was a new hit, Raise a Hallelujah. And then as the chorus goes, I'm going to sing a song in the middle of a storm. I can't sing, so. But the way it sounded was louder and louder. And hear the praises roar up from the ashes. Hope will arise. There is indeed the King is alive. That's how we're singing it. But when we got to that point where it says, hear my praises roar, I heard a roar, a literal roar come out of Connie's voice. And I turned the volume and I go, hey, did you hear that? And she goes, no, I didn't hear that. I go, I just heard a roar come out of your mouth. And she's like, no, I was just singing. And so I was like, well, what the hell? And so I immediately turned the volume back up, and we just kept pouring our praises on the altar. But on an unconscious level, at that moment, I knew something changed. At an unconscious level, I knew at that moment I wasn't going to die. It wasn't something I realized. It took me months and even years to really put the whole piece together, right? And it just came to me slowly by slowly. But it was just God declaring at that moment, His loud and powerful roar was over all the despair and fear that I had in my heart, right? And that roar changed everything. That's what God's declaration, that my standard of Him was overruled. But His standard, as a self-existent, self-sufficient, infinite, immutable, omniscient, wise, omnipotent, omnipresent, transcendent, faithful, good, just, merciful, grace-filled, sovereign, holy, loving character. That's the God that roared. Now, I can't say that I understood it all at that moment. I think my mind did it. I think my spirit did. Something in my spirit caught on to that. And it's taken me the subsequent years to look back to see that His standard for Himself was perfect for my life. You'll notice that from now on the tone changes. From fear and death and despair to confidence that I would not die. At first, little things. There was little things like Elena actually came that night before the surgery. She came and joined us. And it was really good because Connie didn't have somebody to be with because I was in the hospital, right, 5 days. And so they got to be together and hang and go shopping in Seattle and, that kind of stuff. It was just a really positive thing, right? And then another thing is, I lost a third of my blood, the surgery. The surgery was actually quite complicated. My spleen was attached to my diaphragm and other organs, and they had to go in and scrape off, and it took a long time, and I lost a lot of blood. But the doctor comes to me and says, you have a splenoid. A splenoid is like a baby spleen. I have 2 spleens. Only 10% of people have that. Isn't that great? I lost my spleen, but I had a spare part. How cool is that? So I'm not saying I'm going, well, did you get all the cancer? No, I was like, well, that is really cool. And so another thing that happened is when I was in the hospital for the whole week, I was taking notes of each of my caregivers by name so I could write a detailed report to the hospital to report to them that acts of kindness that each one of them showed me. Is that somebody in despair? See the change? Now, I didn't have words for what I was going through yet. And I didn't have words that I knew that I wasn't going to die. Other things happened. I kind of became an expert in nutrition of cancer patients, in my view, right? My son and I watched actually for the first time ever. I had never watched a single episode. But I watched all 10 seasons of The Office. Well, if I'm going to die, am I going to waste my time watching the show on TV? Well, why not? It was important to my son. Let's watch it together. You know what I mean? So things started to become more conscious to me. Like I started to understand this feeling that this roar effect in my life. When my son's teacher came by with a beautiful hanging basket and these gorgeous flowers in it. But the look on their face was like they were at my funeral. And I turned to them and I said, for the first time, it's the first time that I actually vocalized the effect of the world. Sorry, guys. And I started to state, I'm not going to die from this. And it was not hyperbole. It wasn't like I was making it. It wasn't like I was like, I'm standing on faith, who's got to speak all the good things, None of that. It was truly a belief from deep down inside of me. I just knew that I knew that I wasn't going to die from the cancer. I just knew it. It's pretty cool. So I still have to endure chemo, right? And it's a very very toxic one too. So they told me that like by day 6 I was going to lose my hair. And on day 6 I'm actually sitting in my office, right? And I'm like this, reading something. Like most possibly going through 3,000 emails, And I went like this and I stopped. It's not my hair. My head. Right? Now, what I'm going to tell you next, I found out most men find funny, most women don't. Okay? So I had this great idea. I was like, this is going to be so cool. So I got up, I walked out, I went all the way across the building to the principal, who was a good friend of mine, right? And I went in his office, and at the time I was an instructional coach, so I had a classroom. I actually helped teachers teach, right? And so he had a policy that if I ever went into his office, if I was frustrated, I need to vent, that if I just closed the door, he'd give me 100% of his attention, right? So I went in, closed the door, sighed, and then very emotionally, I said, I am not sure I can handle these teachers anymore. They're just frustrating so far. I'm going to pull my hair out. Boom. 2 large clumps of hair on my hand. And the look on his face was like, and then we started laughing. We just started laughing our heads off. It was so funny. It was so funny that he actually had me come and do the same thing over for like the assistant superintendent and the vice principal, she did it. And all these people came by and he was like, clump of hair in his garbage can at the end of the day. It was just hysterical, So it was, what I love about that story is it illustrates, here I'm going through something horrible. Going through chemo stuff is terrible. And yet, I knew I wasn't going to die. So hey, let's have some fun with this, right? Another fun experience was one day during infusion, which took about 6.5 hours. they gave you the spinning drill so you sleep on and off all day long. And they were giving me the one chemo. There's 5 chemos they give you. One of the chemos they gave me, in my Facebook support page, we called it the devil's juice. The nurse has to double glove and put on like extra plastic because if the chemo lands on your skin, it will make a hole in it, right? So that we put that in the body. So, but the science behind it is really cool. That's the one that actually destroys the bad RNAs that create the cancer, that chemical. So that's like really cool. Okay, sorry, nerd moment. But I'm sitting there, and so they gave me this stuff, and I fell asleep. I woke up, and everything was a shade of green. Like there was no other color. Green, like dark green, light green, and everything between. Like everything was green, right? And I'm going, wow, this is so cool, Connie. Everything is green. And she pops out of her chair to go get the nurse. I'm like, don't get the nurse. I don't want this to be over yet. I want to enjoy this. Well, I'll never go through this again, And she's like, she got the nurse anyways, And a few minutes later, everything went back to all the colors. But it was just like, wow, this is really kind of cool. Instead of being like upset and mad that everything was green, I thought it was interesting. Now, please don't misunderstand. It was not a fun experience. I never, ever, ever again in my life want to go through that again. Right? Yet, I was empowered by the life of God that came through that war. I think one thing in my church told me later, a few years later, she was like, it was amazing the way you handled that. And then, later on that day, I was thinking about it. What she said, and I go, it doesn't look amazing when you're at war with God. When this war of God was just, I was writing it like a wave. And after the war, I just moved on with my life. Like, wasn't aware that it had changed anything. There was a slow realization that it took me like a couple of years when I finally realized at that point, driving that blue CRV, right? Connie was driving. We were going on a highway, I-82, going north, going uphill. It was a snowstorm. About 20 miles out of Yakima. 2 people that were so full of fear and despair decided to worship because they didn't know what else to do. And God delivered us through a roar in Connie's mouth. That moment changed everything for me. I've come into this experience doubting God, doubting what kind of God I serve, especially judging His character. Judging His character because He wasn't consistent in healing the people that I love. But now He's healed me. Now what do I do with that? Right? Now I cannot say that I now never wonder if somebody doesn't get healed, why God didn't heal them. I was completely undeserving. I was an oh ye little faith person, if I had any at all. Right? But I still wonder, but it doesn't have a sting anymore. Right? That roar tore down walls that I had built up against God. And in subsequent months, I actually participated in several prayer counseling sessions. And it helped me mentally and emotionally start to understand what that roar did. Like in one of them, I ended up addressing this weird interpretation of being under the blood of Christ, where I kind of saw myself, but because I saw God as so distant, I saw that He actually put the blood between me and Him. Instead of the blood between my sin and Him, it was between me and Him. And so to feel like, I'm welcome into His presence. Like He does want me to be in His presence. He's not a distant God. He's a personal God. You know what I mean? And so that was all part of my healing. It's been 7 years and 10 months since the ripple, and all the ripples of that roar are still influencing my life. Like I even reevaluated faith. I decided to avoid it, and God challenged me and said, without faith, you can't be with me. So you got to figure this out. I reevaluate like justice and the Sermon on the Mount, my own political views. I would actually say that I think I'm a better man because of this roar. I think I've become a better husband, a better dad, a better employee. I may even become a better friend because of this roar that God had in my life. What I'm really saying through this whole thing is that God that roared in my life wants to roar in your life too. Actually, I want to propose that He might have already roared in your life. I mean, it's 7 years later, and I'm still figuring out what this war did in my life. The ripple effects. Like the ripple effect of when you throw a rock in the pond and it keeps going. Like that moment has a ripple effect throughout, right? I mean, God is so gracious with us because His ways are so much higher than ours. That war in my life, He chose to demonstrate as His way of demonstrating His victory, right? Being an infinite, wise, omnipresent God, He will speak to you as He knows it will be the most efficient. His character, let me go through it once again, is self-existent, self-sufficient, infinite, immutable, omniscient, wise, omnipotent, omnipresent, transcendent, faithful, good, just, merciful, grace-filled, sovereign, holy, and loving. That is who He is. He is those things. And I might have missed some too, right? But because of those characters, He will not allow Himself to leave you hanging. It compels Him to act. Because of who He is, it compels Him to act. His character will not allow Him to leave you hanging. I just think that's such an important point. God did not leave me hanging in fear and despair. He gave me hope like I don't know I've ever experienced in my life. Because that's what I needed at that moment. It was so profound that it took years to even figure out that it even happened. Like, I forgot about that war. It took me like 2 years to remember that it even happened. Right? And then I started putting all the pieces together. So that's the kind of God that we serve. He is compelled to act because of who He is. And He does it because of who He is, not because of what I thought He was. Right? I thought He was distant. And so that makes a God that I can't really trust. Well, because of who He is, I can trust Him completely. Because He will always act by the way that He is. His character determines His intervention in your life. God changes your life because of who He is. He came and died on the cross because of His character. He rose from the dead because of His character. Right? He did all these things in life because of who He is. That's just so amazing. It's amazing to serve a God that goes by who He is, not by who we think He is. Right? I mean, the Greek gods believe that they will actually, the gods will actually disappear if people stop believing them. It's the belief of the people that keep them strong, not our God. The only thing that keeps Him strong is Him. The only thing that keeps Him existing is Him, because He's self-existent. Right? He is there for us in such a way that we cannot see past it, because He is God. And He just wants us to be His children. So I would encourage you this week or today or maybe when we have a communion, ask God, could you remind me of the wars in my life? When did you speak to me? At what point did you actually speak to me and make that thing in my life that changed, that had an effect? When was that? Can you remind me of that? Can you help me see the ripple effect of your voice in my life? Can you show me that? Can you reveal that to me? Because that's really cool that God didn't just roar. He actually gave us His, He gave us His, I forgot what I was going to say. He roared, but then He shows me the effect of it. Like He revealed over the years, He's been revealing to me the effect of it. I can remember going, wow, that is pretty cool. That really happened. So, maybe what we can do is right now, how about if we switch it? We'll do communion first, and then we can finish with a song. I can see you guys are playing something. So, if you guys want to get up and grab a communion cup, grab one of the communion cups, and you can stay in your seat, go back to your seats or whatever, and then just have a time between you and God. Ask Him, how is He reminding you of the time of the roar and the ripples of that roar? Let's take a moment to just think communion, just to kind of focus on that. And then after that, I think the worship team is going to come back up and they're going to sing a song.